Hey, I'm Ross and welcome to Biker Talk. We're going to get straight into today's episode because honestly, there's a hell of a lot to get through. I hope you enjoy this video with motorcycle journo, author, editor of Old Bike Magazine Australasia, Isle of Man TT racer, Aussie dirt track legend, recipient of the Order of Australia medal, and basically all-round good bloke, Jim Scaysbrook.
My name's Jim Scaysbrook and I've been riding for a very long time. Well, my father was a scrambles trials rider, and he, even though he'd stopped riding in the interim when we were growing up, there was always an old bike or two laying around the garage, and for some years. And when we started to get a bit inquisitive with my brother Peter and I, we dragged them out, started pulling them apart, and then not knowing how to put them together. And finally, we built up a couple of farm bikes, paddock bikes, took them down to Currarong to the south coast there, and just used to go down there on weekends and just tear around as you were able to do. Then there wasn't too many rules, out in the sand hills. And when I started to race at the age of 16, my father actually started racing again himself, even though he was a pre-war rider, so he was getting on a bit. And he and I, and later my brother Peter, two years later, were all racing together. Well, from the first, I think, actual racing season I did was 1964. I put my age up to get the licence, so didn't talk about that for a while, but it's long enough now that it doesn't matter. But everybody did that. Well, I loved it. I mean, it was all I wanted to do. I certainly enjoyed it more than school. So I did the first few years just riding the old British stuff, and then, like everybody, had to change over. And luckily I got, I had a fair bit of success and managed to get sponsored by various trade organisations and importers and things, and I really didn't even own a bike myself for quite a long time. Always riding somebody else's bikes, which is good. I decided I was going to go to England to ride motocross. This was in the late 60s, I think. And I sold my car and everything I had basically to go to England. And then I had about 6 months to kill before I could go by ship. And to kill the time and to make a bit of money, I started working with Bennett Honda in Zetland in Sydney. And what happened was that there was a new big dealer in Newcastle, John Harris. We got talking and he said, well, I'd like to open in Sydney, but I can't be in both places at once. How about we do something together? So we did. We just drove around, we found something, and a little shop, and away we went, and it just went terrific. We sold heaps of bikes. The racing side of it was there and able to be supported by the shop as well. So it was pretty good. Then Sue walked in one day and said, would you mind servicing my bike? And I said, no problem. Well, the guys that were in the shop were all well-known people, the salesmen and the servicing people and things like that. We were a pretty sort of interesting bunch, and this guy, Greg Heath, decided we could create a better class of advertising than what was generally, motorbike shops just put a picture of the shop and come and buy a bike from us. And we decided to try to make personalities, I guess, out of ourselves, which is what we did. And those ads, they're still around, some better than others. Here it was, it was good fun, but it was there was a limit to basically what you could do. There was a couple of instances here where they brought the Europeans out for a small Australian series. Having experienced that level of competition, I thought, well, it'd be nice to have a bit more of this. I went with another guy from Sydney, Laurie Alderton, and we just took a couple of bikes from here, shipped them over there, and bought a big van and threw them in the back, and away we went. But we didn't really plan it particularly well, but yeah, we got better at it. I ended up buying a classic racing bike, a 7R AJS, just because I'd always loved them. And so I bought this thing, and at that point, which was about the mid-70s, historic road racing was starting up, and it really took off. And I got very interested in that, and so I bought another bike. The 7R was a 350, and I bought a 500 engine for it. And they started every January from, I think, 1976, they held at Amaru Park the all-historic race meeting, which was cars and bikes. And in 1977, I think, which was the second of those meetings, they brought Mike Hailwood out from, he was living in New Zealand at that stage, so they brought him over here, and the main race of that day was the City of Sydney Cup or something, and I won it, and he was second. And basically the end of the meeting, we had a few beers together, and I found him to be just a remarkably modest and easy guy to know. Struck up a bit of a rapport, but I probably thought, well, that's the end of that. But then, because of the success of historic racing, the annual Bathurst meeting at Easter each year, the organisers in that year, 77, decided they'd put a historic race on. And Mike came over again to ride the same Norton, and I rode the same Matchless, and the result was the same. So I sort of won it again. So we sort of, that became a bit newsworthy, and it led to somebody cooking up an idea that we could team up to ride in the Castrol 6-hour race together. So we went in the 6-hour race, and to our amazement and probably everybody else's, we did very well. We finished 6th outright, and we didn't do a fuel test or anything. We just went out and rode. Everybody else has measured their fuel down in egg cups. We made an extra pit stop that we didn't need to, simply because we didn't know how much fuel was in the bike. And we had one set of tyres for the whole practice and race, where everybody else had as many as they wanted. So we did it fairly laid back, but we had a lot of fun. And that Mike and I, by that stage, were fairly good friends. This whole process started him thinking about maybe going back to the Isle of Man, because they were probably prepared to pay him what he was worth. And that led to him riding the Ducati, Works Ducati at the 78 TT. And as that unfolded, he basically said in a half-hearted way, you should come over too, you'd enjoy the TT. Yeah, it was enjoyable, it was a great experience. In hindsight, I would have done things a bit differently. We had a major problem with the bike that caused me to crash, which is not what I wanted to do at the Isle of Man. But, we got through it, brought the bike back here, and rode it once here at street races in Canberra, and then it went to its new home in Brisbane, where it still is. Well, after I'd been to the TT in 1978 and sort of, got through it all right, but as I said, I've always felt I could have done a lot better. So with a break of 2 years to regroup a little bit, I bought a TZ500 Yamaha, which was meant to be the next best thing, and I took that over to the TT in 1980. That was when Mike had his dealership there, and he entered the bike for me, and it had Hailwood and Gould on the side of it, and he opened an awful lot of doors. And so I rode that there. It was a very disappointing motorbike. It had a terrible gearbox problem, and results that doesn't bear thinking about. And brought it back and sold it. And that could have been the end of the TT thing, but then Mike was killed in 1981, and they held a classic TT, one and only classic TT, in 1984. So I ended up back there again, which was another disaster. But I always kicked myself with that 84 race, because at that stage I was riding my own Matchless G50 and classic racing here. I was doing pretty well. The bike was well prepared, and I should have taken the bike from here over there, but I didn't. I relied on other people, and another lesson learnt. But that was the last time I've been to the Isle of Man. And now Rennie's going back there. Maybe there's a chance for me to go and keep an eye on him. I don't really know yet. Well, we sort of knew it was going to come. I think having been to Pikes Peak to watch him the first year there, I think the Isle of Man's a doddle compared to Pikes Peak. I mean, there's not 1,000-foot drops for a start. There's air you can breathe. There's not a lot of oxygen at 14,000 feet at the top of Pikes Peak. So I guess, I think with his 4 years at Pikes Peak, the maturity that he achieved in that period will stand him in good stead for the Isle of Man. By about 2000, I had a partnership in an agency, and things were starting to get a bit rocky again. So I started writing books, and I wrote one particular book. It went very well. It was a compendium of, basically, like a chronicle of post-war motorcycling in Australia, virtually date by date, race by race, events, releases, everything I could think of. And doing that, to do that, I got my hands on all kinds of magazines and newspapers and did heaps of research, spent half my life in the Mitchell Library, and anyway, produced this great big book. And I'd learnt so much about the whole history of the stuff in Australia that I thought, there's a spin-off, there's got to be a spin-off of this as well. And at that stage, the only classic type magazines in Australia were British. So I thought, well, there's definitely an opening for a local product. We started Old Bike Magazine about 2006, and they went gangbusters because of those reasons. People finally had a local magazine with the names they knew and the places and the events and everything. So we enjoy it, we really do, and we know our readers enjoy it because of the amount of correspondence we get, and that's a good feeling. If you think you're providing something that people get pleasure out of, well, that's nice. So I've got a TX 750 Yamaha, a VF 750 Honda, a CB 750 Honda. Sue's got a CB 500 Honda and a GB 500 Honda. So they're all vintage Japanese bikes. Plus the Velo, plus a little Moto Guzzi 250, which is in our living room. So, and there's a couple of others in other states that having work done on them and things like that. The Velo, it's just part of the family. It's a beautiful bike to ride and looks nice. It's got heaps of personality. And all the bikes have got personality, but some more than others. Well, a lot of historic rallies and things like that. Through the business, through the magazine, and we enjoy those a lot. It means get away for the weekend, interstate. I've always had, a modern road bike, and I ride all the time. Going to town, I would always take the bike rather than a car if possible. We do a bit of leisure riding on the modern bikes. Sue's got a Yamaha MTA7, so whenever we can, we do. Oh, gee, that's hard. I mean, I would have loved to have kept the Ducati from the Isle of Man, but it was never a possibility. They're still arguing about who really owned it, but if I had have had the chance, I would have, for sure, because that's a very rare and significant bike, thanks to Mike. I think one of the best things that we've done in recent times, we got a Ducati loaned to us in Europe. We picked it up from Bologna and went over with some friends of ours who had a BMW, and we did a ride all through Italy and France and Switzerland and all over the place, and it was just fantastic. It really was a great holiday, and we managed to sort of get away from the business and all the hassles here, but it was just such a wonderful trip. Spoiled us a bit, actually. I think it's the people, the friendships, the it's the group we mix in. We've tried a few different things. I played golf for a long time, but it never quite hit the same buttons as motorcycling. These days, with the traffic and everything the way it is, there's no substitute for experience and watching what you're doing and being careful. I think that the density of traffic these days, probably people's awareness of motorcycling is not probably what it was a generation ago. You've just got to be very careful. But if you are, it's still a fabulous thing to do.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. If you have a story you'd like to share, get in touch and we'll see if we can make it happen. My email address is in the description. That's all for today, and remember, you can't buy happiness, but you can ride a motorcycle, and that's kind of the same thing.